Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to talk about macros in Excel and VBA. Again, this is video number 2 on this topic. Last time, if you remember, we talked about several topics about basics, right? How to use message box, input box, how to define variable, add comments, add micro buttons, add code or subroutines for them, do the logic, make decisions using if then else and switch, read from cells, write to cells, change the color of the cells, use worksheet functions, change variables from one type to another, and so on. This time we are going to talk about loops, strings, arrays, user-defined functions, and events. Okay, so first let's start talking about arrays and matrices. If you want to create them in VBA, how do we do that? I showed you in my previous videos if you want to create them and handle them in worksheets, what you can do, right? So there is a video on that, please go and watch it. But now if you want to handle them in VBA, define them and do something with them, what should you do? So here I have this macro that I added, and what it does create a 3x3 matrix for me over here, and it does create a 4x1 vector over here. So all I need to do is to click on this guy, and it will populate those cells with a vector and a matrix. But what is it happening behind the scene? So if we go to this and look at the let me find it here, array demo. So the way that you define an array or a matrix, so here array 1 is the vector, array 2 is the 3x3 matrix, is after you use dim and the name of the array or matrix, then you provide the dimension. If it's just a vector, you just provide how many elements. If it's a matrix, then you need to provide the number of rows and columns. Now in VBA, like C or Python, the index starts with 0, not like MATLAB when the first entry of any matrix or vector starts with 1. Here you're starting with 0. So when you say the size is 4, when you want to define the entries, you start with entry number 0, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and you use parentheses to define each entry. The other important or nice thing is here, like in MATLAB, if you remember, when you wanted to put some values together, if it was a regular vector, it has to be basically a vector of all numbers or all letters. You could not store heterogeneous data under one variable unless it was a cell array. But in Excel, you don't have any problem. You can store heterogeneous data all under the same variable name umbrella. So here, my first 3 entries are numbers. My last one is what? Something like a string. Okay? So you can easily mix, no problem. Now I create those, and then let's say I want to write these 4 numbers onto what? Onto cells, as you can see here, B2, 3, 4, and 5. So what can I do here? So if you look, if I just go ahead and say, hey, range of B2 to B5 dot value equal to array number 1, guess what's going to happen? You're not going to get what you just saw. So let me do that for you. So if I do this one, just say, since it has 4 entries, go ahead and put it into cells B2 to B5. If I do that, look what happens. You see? The only entry that is written in all of those 4 cells is the first one, 1. So although you say write array, the whole array 1 by 1 into each one of those cells, but it only writes array number 0 in each one of those 4 cells. So if you want to type all of your entries in a range, this single command is not going to work. So what I did instead, I used the for loop. So this top one is just the title. That is this top cell here which says vector. So that's separate. If I want to populate this with entries one by one, I here use the for loop, and that is also a demo for loops, right? Remember here we need to also talk about loops. A for loop in a VBA is very similar to many other languages. You say for counter equal to initial value to final value, and then here you say cell that specific location or row dot value is equal to array 1 I minus 1 and then next. So a for loop has to end up with the keyword next. And here when I is 1, this is going to be entry number 0, which is the first one. And where is it going to sit? It is going to sit in row 2, column 2. The next one is going to be row 3, column 2, which is B2, B3, B4, B5. So now if I do it, you see, I get what I should be getting. So make sure you use a for loop if you want to go and type each and every one of entries one by one in a range, and do not use the simple command range dot value. Okay, it's not going to work. Okay, what about the matrix? So that's the same thing. Here you have defined the dimension is 3 by 3, and then again the top left corner, which is the first row and the first column, you show it with entries 0 and 0. So here I have defined all 3 rows and all 3 columns, all 9 entries, and again I use a for loop, but since it has rows and columns and my loop counter should go over rows and columns, I use nested for loops. So I use a for loop within another for loop. One of them goes over rows, one of them goes over columns, and it writes the entries to locations from D2 all the way to F4. And again, if here I say range of D2 to F4 equal that array number 2, again all you get is this 1 entry. This 0 is going to be populated all over the range. Okay, so you need to use the nested for loops. So hopefully you now are familiar with how to define a vector or a matrix and how to use one for loop or nested for loops to get your job done. Okay, so this is for that. Now, a for loop is not the only loop that you have in VBA. There are other loops too. There is while, there is do while, and so on. Here, since I mentioned for loop, I'm gonna also mention while loop. Do while is very similar to while. The only difference is while checks the condition in the beginning. Do while check the condition at the end. Okay, other than that, they are the same idea. And the main difference between while loop and for loop is in a for loop, you exactly know how many times the operations are going to be repeated. So you start from some initial value and then you go to some final value. And you might have some increment, I'll show you in a minute, but you exactly know the number of repetitions of the commands. In a while loop, you might not know ahead of time. That's the main advantage of while loop, that it keeps going until some condition is valid or some condition is violated. So for example, here you say, I start my loop counter at 1 and I keep running until the modulus of the counter and 5 is not equal to 0. So modulus of 1 and 5 is 1, which is not equal to 0. By the way, not equal to in VBA is bigger than and less than. In MATLAB, if you remember, it was tilde and equal. In VBA, it's bigger than and less than together. So you say by the time, and this is the mode function, by the way, the modulus. By the way, the modulus of counter and 5 is not equal to 0, keep going. So it keeps going, 1 plugs in, it's not equal to 0, that's good, means now what? Now go ahead and add 1 to the loop counter, show this message, which is a combination of text and the variable through a message box, and repeat the operation until it reaches to 5. Now mode 5 is 0, so this condition is violated, that's when the loop stops. Okay, and the condition could be quite more complicated than this. So you can here basically add a condition after this while. And the condition could be a mixture of so many other logicals that you combine using and, or, not, and so on. So this is going to be a complicated condition that every time the while loop is running, it is going to be re-evaluated. Okay, so you might not know exactly how many times ahead of time the loop is going to run. It runs as many times as this condition is valid. Okay, now several things here. One is here you see in this line, not only I declared the variable, I also assigned something to it. In the past, if you remember, I declared the variable in a line, and then in a separate line I assigned something to it. Now I'm doing both of them in the same line. How? After I declare my variable, then I use the column and then I assign the variable. So you can combine it, okay, if you want. That's one thing. Two, I showed you that and means concatenation. So here I'm combining a text and I'm combining a variable that is changing. So I can concatenate using and. Three, the while loop does not have a mechanism to change the counter. You have to write a line of code for it. In the for loop, it does change the loop counter automatically each time. You don't need to worry about that. In the while loop, there is nothing. First of all, you have to start the loop counter with the command, and then you have to have something inside the loop to what? To change the loop counter. So this is called counter initialization, which happens before the loop, and then you have some loop changing instruction that is happening inside the loop. You have to do both. For loop does all of that when you simply declare this. I changes from 1 with increments of 1 at the time to go to 4. While loop, you have to do it. And finally, for loop ends with the keyword next. That's how VBA knows a for loop is finished. While loop ends with the keyword W end. W stands for while, so while end. If you don't put it there, it's not going to be happy. It is going to pick on you. So make sure you put it there. Okay, so here you can see several new topics. Good. So now let's go ahead and run it. So if I click here and run, you see it says the current loop counter is 2. Why 2? We started at 1, but before we show the message box, if you look, before we show the message box, we added 1 to it already, then we showed the message box. If we want 1 to be shown, we have to bring this message box line up and bring the counter addition down. So first it shows the message box with counter of 1, then it adds to the counter. So don't be surprised if it is starting at 2. 3, 4, and 5 is good. Now it's not good anymore, because now that it goes to 5 here. So counter was 4 when you entered. Counter was 4 when you entered. It makes it 5. It show it with a 5, and then what? And then ends, right? So if you really want it to be more meaningful, maybe you need to what? As I said, bring this command up a little bit, right? So here, let's do that and run it one more time. This is going to be a little bit more meaningful. So you see now it says 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it goes away, because when it reaches 5, the condition is violated, the loop is going to stop. So the order of the commands and everything, and when and where you put this loop counter increment or decrement, it is important. It's not necessarily always at the end of the while loop. Sometimes it has to be above some lines of command. So where you put this in the while loop, that's another important thing. You have to think about it, what your loop is going to do for you. Okay, so now that you see while loop, so I told you about the major loops, for loop, while loop, and I said that do until is the same as while loop, except it checks the condition at the end. So instead of saying, hey, while condition is true, do something, that one says what? It says do something, correct? Right? So it says do, it provides a command, something, and then what? So it is going to be until some condition is true. Okay, of course it is going to pick on me because what I wrote is not really according to syntax, but that's the structure, right? Do something until some condition is true, or instead of until, it could be while some condition is true. Okay, so that's the structure of that do until or do while. And a couple of other things I need to tell you. One is sometimes you need to break a loop in the middle of it running because something happens and you need to stop the loop. And that is most useful for a for loop, because while loop, you have control over it, right? You can continue it until the condition is valid. So if you need for some reason to stop while loop, you can probably incorporate it here. But for loop just keeps going until the loop counter is the final value. What if at some point something happens and you want to stop the for loop from running? Is there any way that you can do it? The answer is yes. There is something called exit for. So this allows the exit of for loop to happen. So let's say here, for example, I'm going to show everything in this array number 1 on those cells, right? But I want to make sure I only show numeric values inside this array. Whenever I reach the first string, I would like to stop. Okay? So whenever I reach to some string, I'm not going to show it here like this. I just want to show this 1, 2, 3. Can I do that, right? So can I provide a condition within a for loop? And the answer is yes. How? So let's talk about it. So here I say for I from 1 to 4, right? Then you provide a condition, you provide if. You say if, and then what? You have to say if it's not numeric, correct? Then what? Or if it's numeric, go ahead and show it, correct? So if it's numeric, go ahead and show it. Else, if it's not numeric, and you have to use then. So first of all, how do I check whether that entry is numeric or not? So we need the command. In Excel, we had the command is numeric, correct? So whether this command works or not, we have to check. But we have to say if is numeric of something, then do something, right? So we say if is numeric of that array number 1 entry II, right? If it's numeric, then go ahead and show it. Else, correct? If that's not the case, then what? Then exit the for loop, correct? And then what? It has to be end of if. Remember, if you remember the first lecture, we had the if conditions, right? Where was it? Here. So you had if, then, else if, then, else, and then what? And if. This is the structure of a nested if condition, right? Multiple if conditions. So you have to end it also with the keyword end if, correct? So that's what we do. We say end if, okay? So it checks now. If it's numeric, show it, else exit the for loop. So when it reaches to this string, it's not going to show it because this condition is false. So it comes to else condition, and for else, we said exit the for loop, correct? So let's see whether it works or not. So now click on it, and you see it shows 1 and 2, which is good. But why didn't it show me the last number? Why? Because we did not use I minus 1. Remember? We start, when this is 1, we start with number 0, entry 0. Here we started with entry 1, so that's what happened, okay? So we need to make sure this is also what? I minus 1. So now let's do it again. Oh, sorry. Wrong item. Here we go. You see, so I did not now show all of it. When some condition happened, I stopped. Okay, so this exit for loop is one nice thing to have within a for loop. And the last thing I want to tell you about the for loop is, what if you don't want to go one by one at a time, increment one at a time from 1 to 4. If you want to have an increment, so let's say I want to go from 1 to 4, but with increment of 2, right? Or I'm going to go from 1 to 10, but with increment of 2. How can I do that, right? So if you want to specify an increment, the way to do it is you need to use the keyword step. So you have to say step 2. Okay, then the step size or the increment is going to be 2 at a time. So what it does, it goes with 1. It checks entry number 0, so it shows this, then jumps with 2, so it's going to skip this guy and goes to this one, and types 3, and then when it reaches this fire, because it is what, first of all, it doesn't even reach this, because when it jumps by another 2, it jumps to 4, and there is no 4, so it's going to stop. So if we want to change it, you know what, let me add 1 extra here, and this is what I do. I will add some numerical, and I make that guy entry number 4. So when I start from the first one and jump 2 at a time, I ideally should be able to reach this, okay? And the problem is then, so you know what, let me change this to 3, let me change this to 4. This way it reaches this, but then since it violates this condition, it's not going to show it, okay? So here I make this 5, and so now let's see what happens. So now it should skip, and let me change this number to 4. It should skip 2 and 4 and not show 2 and 4, and it should also skip this fire because it is a string, so it should only show 1 and 3 this time, right? So let's go ahead and do it, see what happens. Here, there we go, and you see it left a space for me here. Why? Because that's how this code is written, right? The location increments by I, so it will leave a blank space in 2 and 4 and also in 5. Okay, so that's how it shows it. So hopefully now you know about step and exit for more controls for a for loop. There we go. So I covered for you loops, I covered for you arrays, and now I have to go ahead and cover more things for you. One of them is strings, and one of them is a user-defined function. So for a string, right? What am I doing here? So here I have some string written that VBA is fun, and when I click on this button, it's gonna populate here, 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 and here, and it runs some string commands for me. Here, it's going to convert all of this guy into uppercase and write it here. Here, it's going to show me how many characters it has, the length of it. Here, it's going to find some text in it and replace it with something else. And here, it's going to show me 3 characters from the left picked from that string. So here, let's click on it. You see here, everything is uppercase. It says it's 10 characters, and it is. That's 3, 2, 3, that's 8, and there are 2 spaces, so that's 10. Here, what I did, I found the word fun in the big string, and I replaced it with awesome. And here, I just took the first 3 letters of this string and basically pasted it over here. So what is it that I'm doing behind the scene, right? So if we look at this string demo, here I have several string variables as well as the length, which is the length of the string as double. Then I say string number 1, the original string, is cell 324 value. So it is going to be what? C24. Read C24, which is here, and call it string number 1. Now string number 2 is U case. U case means upper case. So this command will convert your string into uppercase, and then I'm going to show that uppercase where? In C26. There is a similar command here, is called L case. Okay, so if you want to convert something all into lowercase, that's what you can use, L case command. Then I take the length of the string, call it length, and show it in C28. So the command to use here is len, length of a string. Then I have the command replace. So in replace, you do what? You basically first provide the original string, then you provide the search word or find word, and then what? The replace word. So maybe here I make it what? Instead of awesome, I make it amazing, and finally I have the command left, which takes so many characters from the left side of the string, assign it to another one, and then I show it here to C32, and that replace in C30, right? So there is also, again, a similar command here called right. So if you want to get so many characters from the right side, you can use the command right. So let's say I only want 2 characters from the left side, right? Or this time I might, as I said, I want to convert it into lowercase, right? So if I run it this time, it should give me a little bit different result. And here we go. You see, now it's all lowercase, still 10. VBA is amazing, and it only got me what? 2 characters, because it is what? It is only V and B, right? And that's what I asked for it. I said 2 characters. So as long as you know the relevant command for strings, there are so many commands in strings, all you need is to do a simple function search in VBA, and it brings you lots of functions that you can use for strings. But these are some of the most useful ones. As I said, the left and right, the replace, the length, lowercase, uppercase, and basically length, as I said, but there are more, okay? But I just want to show you how you can deal with it, not to show you each and every command that is relevant in VBA for strings. So the idea is quite clear. So now let's jump into functions. So for functions or user-defined functions, what's the difference between a function and a sub? Because everything you see here, I have written under sheet 2, they are a subroutine. Subroutines are like scripts in MATLAB. Okay, they are a bunch of commands that can work, and within a subroutine you can call a function. So if you look at this one here, this is a subroutine called function demo, which is for this button here. So when I click on this guy, it is going to take 5 and 4 length and width of a rectangle and then populate this cell, which is the product of the two. So here, you see? But what is happening behind the scene is when I want to do that area calculation, one thing I can do is to do everything here, right? Get the length, get the width from some cells, calculate the area myself here by multiplying them and then showing it onto a specific cell. Most of the time, the operations that you want to do are way more complicated. So it needs lots and lots of lines of code to make what you want happen. So instead of writing all those big lines of code here into each and every one of subroutine that needs to do it, what I'll do, I write a user-defined function that is, the job of it is only doing that specific task. Okay, that's called a modular programming, right? So I have it's like making building a house. The subroutine is like the main contractor, and then those functions are like subcontractors. Each one has a special type of job to do. So here, instead of me calculating it myself, I pass it to a function called findArea. I pass these two as input to it. It returns an output to me, and then I take that output and show it to what? To a specific cell, which is B16 here. Right? So I can write this specialized code for a specific task called functions, and not only this subroutine now can use it, any other subroutine, as long as I call this function findArea and I pass to it input, it gives me an output. And you might say, okay, where did you store the code for this findArea? The best place to store the function for a specific task is under modules. So typically you don't have a folder called modules here. When you start VBA, you only have Microsoft Excel objects, and then you have worksheets, and then you have workbook. Workbook is the entire Excel file, all of the worksheets. So you have subroutines that only work in individual what? Worksheet. So the subroutine that I wrote called date converter, or this one that is like ellipse area or something, these only work when I call them from sheet 1 because they belong only to sheet 1, right? I cannot call them from sheet 2. They only belong to sheet 1, okay? Because they only belong to a specific sheet. There are some stuff that you can write for the entire workbook, like events. I'll show you. That's my next thing to talk about. And if you want something that all of these guys can access, all of them equally, they all have the same, so it's called public access. You all have access to it, then you create it under the modules. And in order to insert a module, all you need is to go up here, and not only you can insert other things, class module, user form, and so on, you can insert the standard module. So class module and user form are a little bit beyond the scope of what I want to do right now. Later, I'll try to make videos on them too. But all you need is to create a standard module. And when you do, you can type the code for your function here. So you see, this is my function, findArea. Then I declare the variables in it. I say length and width, and I also need to tell VBA the type of these variables right here. So length is as double and width is optional as variant. Okay, so that's another interesting thing about functions. Sometimes you might not exactly know, or you might give the user the flexibility to enter a variable number of inputs. So although for a rectangle I need what? A length and a width, Maybe the user assumes it's a square because a square is a rectangle, and all the user is going to provide is one single number, the side length of the square. So if it doesn't provide width, what do? I consider width to be the same as what? Length. So I multiply length by length, and I assume it's a square. Else, if it provides both of them, then what? Then I multiply those two inputs together and I return the output. Okay, so let's talk about several things here. Very important. One, if you want some inputs to be optional, so if the user did not provide them, you do something within your code to handle that. In MATLAB, if you remember, we call it variable argin. Here, it's different. Use the keyword optional. So you say width is optional. You don't have to provide it. And then here I declare it as variance, which is a variable type. But if you want, you can say, no, I want it also to be double. Fine. Now, how would you check whether your function is missing width or not? You have to use the function is missing. You say, hey, is width missing? If it is, then the output is just length by length, else it is length by width. And if and function. Okay? So you need to use is missing. That's the function you need to do, and keyword optional to handle arbitrary number of inputs. That's one. Two, a function needs to end also with the keyword end function. Okay, so function code should end. You cannot just leave it not ended. Three, a function might return something or might not return something. A function has that power that when you call a function, your function might does some job and not give you any number back, or it can give you something back. Okay, and what do I mean by that? So here, the way I wrote my code, I pass to it length and width, and I expect it to give me a number so I can take that number and show it on cell B16, right? That's how I expect my function to work, return a number. And displaying that number on cell 16.2 is done in the subroutine. Now, I could have handled this a little bit differently. How? I could ask this function to calculate area, and then what? Does this job as well and not give me anything back. So when I call the find area, not only it calculates the area, it also does what? It also goes ahead and return that number called area, right? So instead of this find area, when you call it, it can calculate some variable called area here. And then what? When it's calculated, it shows it on that specific cell. Does it need to return anything to me? No, because it's doing all the job by itself. I'm giving it more tasks to do, so it doesn't need to return anything to me. Okay, it is doing the job itself. But if I don't, if I say, hey, just give me the number, I'll take care of the display myself, then it needs to return. Now, how does it return? The way that it returns something is you assign that number you need to return to the name of the function. So if you see here, the variable that I used to return is called what? Find area. I did not call it area, because that's not the name of the function. So if you need to return something, you assign that value or those values to a variable with the same name as the function name. Then it is going to assign it to it and it is going to return it. In some other programming languages, you probably see they have the keyword return, like C. So it says at the end, you create some intermediate variable inside your code, like that area, and then you say what? Return area. And then in the function declaration, so you had something like this in C, right? You say function find area, correct? And you have some output, so you say area equals that, and then here you calculate the area, right? And then before you end the function, you say what? Hey, return the area for me. Correct? So this is how you would handle it in something like C. But in VBA, you don't need to define a separate output variable. That variable is the same name as the name of the function. So as long as you assign something to it, that is doing the job of the return, and you don't need a line or a keyword called return. So that's how VBA is handling return of a variable. Okay, so I get it, I displayed, and that's it. And again, not only now this code that I wrote here, find area, can be accessed through the subroutines in sheet 2, if I call it also in subroutines in sheet 1 or sheet 5 or this workbook, they can all access it. So that's what a module is. A module is an organizer, is a folder that you put your common code, your modular code, your function codes over there so everybody can access it. They are like a toolbox that everybody can use. So that's what a module is. Okay, it's a toolbox of useful code. So hopefully I could also clarify for you the idea of modules, right? Okay, and functions. Now, the last thing we need to talk about is events. But before that, let me one last time summarize the difference between a sub and a function. A subroutine does not return a value, but a function may or may not. I just showed you that function can or cannot return. The subroutine does not return anything. It's just like MATLAB script. It performs a bunch of things, but does not return you anything. Subroutines can be called without a call keyword, okay? So you see, when I click on this button, it uses the subroutine, and it's not really calling this subroutine rectangle area click with inputs and anything, and you do not really need to pass any input to them, and they do not really need to return any output to you. Okay, so you do not really call them, you run them. Again, that's the same exact difference between MATLAB script and MATLAB function. A function you call, a script you run. So that's the same difference that I mentioned here. And as I said, you better store your functions under modules so all worksheets and all subs can access them, so that all worksheet subroutines can access them. Okay, so hopefully this topic is clear to you now. And finally, we can look at events. So events are something that is happening in a sheet alone or for the whole workbook. And if those specific events that are predefined for Microsoft Excel and VBA happening, you can use them as a flag to basically allow you to run some extra code. So for example, you say, hey, anytime the user clicks and creates a new sheet, I want something to happen, right? Anytime somebody deleting a sheet, closing a sheet, renaming a sheet, do something else, I want something to happen. That's called an event. So it raises a flag and waits for your code to run. Okay, if there is no code, it just keeps going. But you can use that as some thing to raise a flag and allow you to run some code. Like what? Like I told you, for example, I want to say, hey, anytime that somebody creates a new sheet, I want you to go ahead and say, hey, create a message box and say new sheet created successfully. Okay, and that's it. That's all I want you to do. So first of all, since creating a sheet belongs to the whole workbook, to the whole Excel, so I have to write it as an event that belongs to the whole Excel or the workbook. And the format for creating a new sheet, the flag for creating a new sheet is like this: workbook_new sheet. And then you declare a variable as an object for a sheet, and you say when that is happening, then go ahead and show the message box. Okay? So this is an event that I defined for the whole workbook, and you see it is under the whole workbook. And anytime I create a new sheet, what's going to happen? So here, let's go ahead and create one. You see? It shows this message to me: new sheet created successfully. If I do another one, look, again, it is going to show up. So as long as I create a new sheet, it is going to what? It is going to show that message to me. Okay, because I added it as an event-driven subroutine. That's what it is. And the event does not need to belong to the whole workbook. It could belong to a specific sheet as well. So if you go here and scroll down, you see the general thing workbook, right? You can do general thing, declaration, you can do workbook, and so on. And so you can have events for a specific, as I said, sheet, or for the whole workbook, anything that is done to it. And general could be even more than just creating a worksheet and so on. There is a list of all sorts of events that you can create for a workbook or in general. And if you want, I can refer you to this nice VBA book. VBA, it's not a book really, it's a tutorial, but it is, you can download it from academia.net. And it has some nice thing about events. So if you go down all the way to events, then where is it? Here. There are worksheet events and there are workbook events, okay? And there are, as I said, there is a big list of things that you can do. Right? Deactivate a sheet, change, calculate, before right click, before double click, activate, pivot table, before discard changes, and so on. So these belong to a worksheet, right? And this is the format of declaring the sub for them. And then there are some for the workbook, right? Which are like before closing, before printing it, before saving it, new sheet, open, activate, double click, sheet calculate, and so on and so forth. Window resize, window deactivate, and so on. Okay, so if you want to know what kind of events are available for a workbook or worksheet and how you can declare the subroutines for them, I recommend you refer to this very good tutorial. Okay, so I assume at this moment I have covered these very important topics for you. And so I stop the lecture right now, and I will see you in my next video where I will talk about active cell, inserting shape and pictures using worksheet shapes, and then the command or the object width. Okay, so I'll see you in one more video. First, I wanted to make 2 videos on VBA macros. I decided to go one level up and show you how to insert the picture, insert the shape, and talk about this width a little bit. So you have a relatively good foundation if you want to write your own macros and work in VBA. Thank you.